When I arrived at my daughter's charity gala, she grabbed my wrist and hissed in my ear, "Mom, you're too old to be seen here." The words hit me like shards of glass slicing through my chest. Too old to be seen here. I felt the heat of shame flood my face as 20 pairs of eyes turned in our direction. The silence in that moment deafening. Too old to be seen here. These were the words from my own daughter, my Emily, the little girl I had raised alone for 23 years after her father walked out on us when she was only 5. My hand trembled as I adjusted the silk scarf around my neck, a birthday gift I'd bought myself last month when I turned 57. The cool fabric against my skin did nothing to soothe the burning humiliation that radiated through my body. I could taste the bitterness of rejection on my tongue, metallic and sharp, as I stood frozen at the entrance of the Westlake Country Club ballroom. The champagne glasses clinked in the background, the sound amplified in my ears while conversations around us gradually resumed, though I could feel curious glances still lingering on me. My daughter, perfect in her black designer dress that had cost $2,300, a fact she had proudly shared during our last phone call, now looked at me as if I were some embarrassing mistake that had wandered into her carefully curated life. "I spent 6 hours getting ready for this," I whispered, my throat so tight I could barely push the words out. "You said it was important to you." The $430 dress I'd splurged on hung from my frame, suddenly feeling too bright, too desperate, too everything. I had chosen it specifically for its modest cut that still showed I made an effort. The deep blue that the saleswoman assured me brought out my eyes. Now it felt like a costume, a pathetic attempt to belong in a world that had already decided I didn't. Emily glanced nervously at a group of younger women by the bar, all impossibly slim with glossy hair and smooth faces. "You should have sent me a picture of what you were planning to wear," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I could have helped you choose something more appropriate." The way she said the word made it clear what she meant. Something that would hide me, disguise me, make me less conspicuously 57, in a room where youth was clearly the most valuable currency. I thought about the 3 outfits I had tried on and discarded before settling on this one. The hours spent applying makeup, carefully, trying to enhance without looking like I was trying too hard. The $175 hair appointment earlier that day, where I'd asked for something elegant but not matronly. All that effort, all that anxiety, all that hope that I could make my daughter proud. Too old to be seen here. 5 words that confirmed every insecurity I'd been fighting since I found my first gray hair at 38. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes, and I reached for one, needing something to do with my hands, something to distract from the crushing weight pressing down on my chest. The cold glass against my palm anchored me slightly as I scanned the room. The event was raising money for children's literacy, a cause I had volunteered for over 15 years. I had taught Emily to read when she was 3. I had read to her every night until she was 12, and decided she was too grown up for bedtime stories. I had paid for her English literature degree at Northwestern, $43,000 a year for 4 years, working overtime at my editing job to afford it. Too old to be seen here. "I think it would be best if you left early," Emily continued, her eyes still scanning the room as if to ensure none of her important connections were watching this interaction too closely. "Richard's parents are coming, and I need to make sure everything goes perfectly with them." Richard was her fiancé of 8 months, the son of a real estate developer who owned half of downtown. "You understand, right? It's just that appearances matter so much in his family, and I need to make the right impression." I took a sip of the champagne, the bubbles bitter on my tongue. I understood exactly what she was saying. I was the wrong impression. I was the wrong appearance. I was the embarrassing mother who, despite my advanced degrees and my middle-class stability and my decades of trying to be everything she needed, was simply too old to be seen. "Of course I understand," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was crumbling. "I'll just say hello to a few people and then go." Even as I said it, I realized I didn't know who I would talk to. The crowd was mostly Emily's age or younger, with a few older men in expensive suits, whose wives or girlfriends were invariably decades their junior. Emily's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with visible relief. I have to go deal with the caterer. Just, try not to stay too long, okay? She squeezed my arm in what might have been meant as affection but felt more like a warning. And then she was gone, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace. Her back straight, her chin high, no trace of the little girl who used to beg me to twirl her around the living room. I stood there alone, the champagne flute now slick with condensation against my palm. The room seemed to expand and contract around me, conversations and laughter creating a soundscape where I was merely an observer, not a participant. I caught fragments of discussions about summer homes in the Hamptons, about trendy new restaurants, about Botox injections and personal trainers. The younger women in the room moved with a confidence I recognized from my own youth, that certainty that the world was made for them, that doors would open, that opportunities awaited. Their skin glowed under the chandelier light. Their hair gleamed, their bodies had yet to betray them with the inevitable changes time brings. After 17 minutes of standing alone, I placed my barely touched champagne on a passing waiter's tray and made my way to the coat check. The young attendant, probably a college student, barely looked at me as she handed over my wrap, a cashmere pashmina that had been a splurge 5 birthdays ago. Outside, the October air was crisp against my heated cheeks, a small mercy. I walked 3 blocks before I trusted myself enough to call an Uber, not wanting to risk Emily seeing me still lingering outside the venue. As I waited on the corner of Maple and 5th, I calculated the cost of this evening. The $430 dress, the $175 hair appointment, the $95 makeup from Sephora, the $60 Uber rides to and from the event. $762. Be told I was too old to be seen. The cost of my humiliation came to approximately $152 per minute for the 5 minutes I had been inside that ballroom. The Uber driver, a man about my age with salt and pepper hair, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Leaving the party early, he asked, his voice kind in a way that suddenly made my eyes burn with unshed tears. It wasn't really my kind of event, I replied, staring out the window at the city lights blurring as we drove through downtown. The truth sat heavy in my throat. It wasn't that the event wasn't for me. It was that I wasn't right for the event, or for my daughter's life, or for a world that increasingly seemed to have no place for women once they passed some invisible expiration date. When I got home to my condo, a modest 2-bedroom I had purchased after the divorce was finalized 12 years ago, I didn't turn on the lights immediately. I stood in the darkness of my living room, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the evening settle around me like a shroud. Too old to be seen here. I wondered when exactly I had crossed that threshold from person to embarrassment, from mother to liability. I wondered if Emily had always felt that way and had just now found the courage to say it, or if this was a new development, a symptom of her ascent into a social circle where a middle-aged mother with faint crow's feet and hands that revealed her true age was something to be ashamed of. I moved through the dark to my bathroom, not turning on the light until I stood before the mirror. Then I forced myself to look, really look, at the woman reflected there. I saw the lines around my eyes that deepened when I smiled, the slight softening of my jawline, the gray that was now more prominent than the original dark brown of my hair. Despite the expensive color treatments every 6 weeks, I saw the slight slump in my shoulders, the evidence of a day spent carrying the weight of trying to be perfect, acceptable, worthy of being seen. But I also saw the eyes that had read thousands of books, that had proofread hundreds of manuscripts in my years as an editor, that had watched my daughter grow from a helpless infant to the poised young woman who now found me embarrassing. I saw the mouth that had taught Emily her first words, that had praised her successes and comforted her failures, that had defended her fiercely when the world was unkind. I saw the hands that had typed millions of words, that had bandaged countless scrapes, that had worked tirelessly to provide everything she needed. I removed the expensive dress, hanging it carefully in the closet where I suspected it would remain unworn from this day forward. I washed off the makeup, watching as the carefully applied products swirled down the drain along with the last of my illusions about my place in my daughter's life, and then, wrapped in the robe I'd had for 8 years, the soft cotton worn thin with washing. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop. At 1:37 a.m., I opened a new document and began to type. When I arrived at my daughter's charity gala, she grabbed my wrist and hissed in my ear, "Mom, you're too old to be seen here." The words hit me like shards of glass slicing through my chest. Too old to be seen here. I wasn't sure why I was writing this down, only that I needed to capture it, to make it real outside of my head, to give shape to the pain that was too immense to contain within my body. I wrote until the sky began to lighten, documenting every moment, every feeling, every realization. It was 5:42 a.m. when I finally closed the laptop and crawled into bed, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter, as if transferring the experience to the page had removed some of its power to wound me. 3 days passed before Emily called. I let it go to voicemail the first time, something I had never done before. When she called again an hour later, I answered, my voice carefully neutral. "Mom, I've been thinking about Friday night," she said without preamble. "I think you might have misunderstood what I was trying to say." There was no apology in her tone, only a slight defensiveness that I recognized from her teenage years when she was caught doing something she knew was wrong. "What part did I misunderstand, Emily?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "The part where you told me I was too old to be seen at your event, or the part where you asked me to leave early so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of your future in-laws?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that stretches uncomfortably when someone is trying to find words to justify the unjustifiable. "You're being too sensitive," she finally said. "I was just stressed about making everything perfect. You know how important the Crawfords are to me and Richard." "I didn't mean anything by it. Didn't mean anything by it," I repeated, the words hollow. I thought about all the times throughout her life when I had swallowed my hurt at her thoughtless comments, when I had made excuses for her behavior, when I had prioritized her feelings over my own. "Do you know how much time and money I spent preparing for that night, Emily? Do you know how excited I was to be included in something that mattered to you?" "Mom, please, you're making this into something bigger than it is," she said, and I could hear the frustration mounting in her voice. "This is exactly what I was worried about. You always get so emotional about everything. Too emotional. Too sensitive, too old, too much." I suddenly saw with perfect clarity the pattern that had been forming for years, the gradual erosion of my worth in my daughter's eyes, the subtle and not so subtle messages that I was somehow less than I should be. And in that moment, something shifted within me, a tectonic plate, moving just enough to change the entire landscape. "I think we need to take a break from each other for a while," I said, the words coming from some newly awakened part of myself. "I need some time to think about what kind of relationship we're going to have moving forward." "What, Mom? You can't be serious." Emily's voice rose in pitch, surprise evident in every syllable. "You're really going to punish me over one little comment? That's not fair." "It wasn't just one comment, Emily. It was one comment to many." I took a deep breath, feeling my hands shake slightly as I held the phone. "I love you. I always will, but I deserve to be treated with respect, and right now, you're not capable of that." "Fine," she snapped, her tone now icy. "Call me when you're done being dramatic." The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. In 23 years of being a mother, I had never once put my own dignity above my daughter's demands. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and finally deciding to spread your wings. That evening, I returned to the document I had started in the dark hours after the gala. I read through what I had written, feeling the raw emotion of that night still pulsing beneath the words. And then I continued writing, documenting this new conversation, this small act of self-preservation that felt so momentous. I didn't know why I felt compelled to record these painful moments, only that there was power in witnessing my own experience, in refusing to let it be minimized or erased. The following Tuesday brought unexpected news from my office. Peyton Publishing, where I had worked as an editor for 19 years, was restructuring. My boss, Marcus, a man 15 years my junior, who had been promoted over me 2 years earlier, despite my having trained him, called me into his glass-walled office at 9:15 a.m. "Catherine, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which should have been my first warning. "As you know, we've been looking at ways to streamline our operations and modernize our approach to publishing." I nodded, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Modernize had become a loaded word in our industry, often a euphemism for replace experienced employees with younger, cheaper ones who are more comfortable with social media. "The company is moving in a new direction," Marcus continued, his fingers steepled in front of him, in what I assumed he thought was an authoritative pose. "We're focusing more on digital platforms, interactive content, reaching younger demographics. The publishing landscape is changing rapidly, and we need to change with it." "I've been taking those digital marketing courses you recommended," I reminded him, thinking of the 12 weeks of evening classes I had completed just last month. The $1,200 I paid out of pocket because the company's professional development budget had somehow been depleted before my request was processed, and I've increased our social media engagement by 42% since taking over the department accounts. Marcus nodded, his expression one of practiced sympathy that immediately made my heart sink. "And we appreciate that effort, Catherine, we really do. But the truth is, we need someone who innately understands the digital landscape. Someone who lives and breathes social media, who can speak authentically to the younger audience we're targeting." "Someone younger, you mean," I said flatly, no longer willing to dance around what was clearly happening. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "That's not what I said. This isn't about age, it's about skill set and cultural fit." "Cultural fit," I repeated, the euphemism hanging in the air between us. "I've edited over 300 books for this company. 12 of them became bestsellers. I've mentored dozens of junior editors, including you, Marcus. I've adapted to every technological change, every market shift, every new corporate directive. What exactly about the culture don't I fit anymore?" Marcus cleared his throat, shuffling the papers in front of him. "Catherine, this isn't personal, it's business. The company is moving towards a more vibrant image. We're competing with startups, with digital-first publishers. Our audience is changing, and I don't project a vibrant enough image. Is that it?" I could feel heat rising to my cheeks, but I kept my voice level, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me become emotional. "Look, we're prepared to offer a generous severance package," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. 6 months' salary, extended health benefits, outplacement services, and of course, we'd be happy to provide references. I stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "How generous of you to provide references after 19 years of service." The bitterness in my voice was impossible to hide now. Marcus sighed, his expression shifting to one of mild impatience, as if I was being unreasonable for not gratefully accepting my dismissal. "Catherine, people move on from jobs all the time. It's part of career evolution. This could be an opportunity for you to find something that's a better fit for your ... for where you are in life, for where I am in life." The words echoed in my head, so similar to what Emily had said. Too old to be seen here. Too old to work here. Too old to exist in spaces where my age made others uncomfortable, where my experience was less valuable than the perceived vibrancy of youth. In the span of 5 days, the two most important parts of my identity, mother and career woman, had been fundamentally altered by this same unspoken judgment. "I'll need time to review the severance agreement with my lawyer," I said, finally picking up the folder. I stood, smoothing down my skirt, a habit from years of making sure I appeared composed and professional at all times. "I assume I'm expected to clear out my office today." Marcus nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. "HR will be available to help you. And Catherine, ... double quotes." He paused, as if searching for the right platitude. "I really do wish you the best." I walked out of his office with my head high, acutely aware of the curious glances from my colleagues, some sympathetic, some carefully averted. By noon, I had packed 19 years into 2 cardboard boxes. My nameplate removed from my office door, as efficiently as my position had been eliminated from the organizational chart. As I carried my boxers to my car, I passed Jessica Holt, a 26-year-old editor, who had joined the company 8 months ago. She gave me an awkward smile and a small wave, her youth and potential almost painfully bright against the gray October sky. 3 weeks later, I would see her name where mine used to be on the company website. Her promotion announced with enthusiastic language about fresh perspectives and innovative approaches. That night, I added this new rejection to my growing document, documenting every word of the conversation with Marcus, every feeling that had coursed through me as I cleared out my office, every realization about how expendable I had become. The act of writing it down was becoming a ritual, a way of bearing witness to my own erasure, of refusing to let these moments slip away unacknowledged. I wrote until my fingers ached, until the words blurred on the screen, until I had captured every nuance of that day's humiliation. At 2:18 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I did something I had never done before. I posted a portion of what I had written to an online forum for professional women, changing names and specific details but keeping the emotional truth intact. I wasn't sure. What I expected, sympathy perhaps, or advice on how to fight back against age discrimination. What I didn't expect was the flood of responses that greeted me when I checked the forum the next morning. Dozens of women, many identifying themselves as over 45, had replied with their own stories. They wrote about being passed over for promotions, about being told they weren't a culture fit, about being relegated to less visible roles, about watching younger colleagues advance past them. Despite having trained those very people, they wrote about plastic surgery consultations and expensive anti-aging creams, about hair dye and Botox and fillers, about the thousands of dollars and countless hours spent trying to appear younger, to remain visible, to continue being seen as valuable. They wrote about daughters who found them embarrassing, about sons who dismissed their opinions, about husbands who left them for younger women, about friends who disappeared into new social circles, where middle-aged women weren't welcome. One comment in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Diana who identified herself as a 62-year-old former human resources executive. "What you're describing isn't just hurtful, it's illegal," she wrote. Age discrimination in employment is prohibited under the Age Discrimination in Employment Act for workers over 40. The way your termination was handled, with those specific comments about cultural fit and finding something better for where you are in life, those are red flags. You should consult with an employment attorney. Document everything. And know that you're not alone in this fight. I stared at those words for a long time, something stirring inside me that I hadn't felt in years. It was anger, yes, but it was also something more powerful, a sense of righteous indignation. A recognition that what had happened to me wasn't just personally painful but part of a systemic problem that affected countless women. And for the first time since that night at the gala, I felt something beyond the hurt and humiliation. I felt purpose. That same day, I made an appointment with an employment attorney, a woman named Rachel Green, whose website specifically mentioned age discrimination cases. 3 days later, at 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, I sat across from her in her downtown office. The folder from Marcus opened between us on her desk. Rachel was perhaps 10 years younger than me, with streaks of gray in her dark hair that she hadn't bothered to color, wearing a sharp blue suit and practical heels. She read through the severance agreement carefully, making notes as she went, then looked up at me with clear, assessing eyes. "Based on what you've told me, and the language used during your termination, I think you have a strong potential case for age discrimination," she said, her tone professional but warm. The comments about cultural fit and finding something more appropriate for where you are in life, combined with the fact that they replaced you with someone significantly younger, create a pattern that's difficult to explain away as anything other than age discrimination. "So what does that mean?" I asked, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "Do we sue them?" "We have options," Rachel replied, leaning forward slightly. We could file a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which would trigger an investigation. That's often the first step before a lawsuit. Or we could approach Peyton Publishing directly, outlining our concerns and seeking a more equitable settlement. She paused, studying me. Before we decide on a course of action, I need to ask, what's your goal here, Catherine? Is it maximum financial compensation, reinstatement, or something else? I considered her question carefully. 2 weeks ago, I might have said I just wanted my job back, wanted things to return to normal. But now, after reading all those stories from women like me, after confronting the reality of how I had been treated by both my employer and my own daughter, I realized my goal had shifted. I want accountability, I said finally. I want them to recognize what they did was wrong and illegal, and I want to make sure they think twice before doing it to someone else. I took a deep breath, and yes, I want fair compensation for what I've lost. Not just the job, but the future I thought I had there, the security I spent 19 years building. Rachel nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's exactly the kind of answer I was hoping for, she said. It tells me you're doing this for the right reasons. She closed the folder and straightened her papers. Here's what I suggest. We document everything thoroughly, every comment made about your age or fit, every younger person who was promoted over you, every instance where your experience was devalued. We gather evidence of your performance reviews, any commendations, statistics on the books you've edited. Then we file with the EEOC, but simultaneously send a demand letter to Peyton, outlining our case and suggesting a settlement that includes not just financial compensation but also policy changes to prevent this kind of discrimination in the future. Will it work? I asked, a flicker of hope kindling inside me. I can't promise an outcome, Rachel said honestly, but I can tell you that companies like Peyton often settle these cases rather than risk the publicity of a lawsuit, especially when the evidence is strong, and I believe we can build a very strong case. As I left Rachel's office an hour later, having signed the paperwork to retain her services, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before that fateful night at the gala: sense of agency, of forward momentum, of refusing to accept the narrative that had been imposed on me. I was no longer just the victim of age discrimination, the embarrassing mother, the disposable employee. I was a woman, fighting back. The next 2 months were a blur of activity. Rachel and I worked together to build our case, gathering documentation from my nearly 2 decades at Peyton Publishing. I discovered I had saved far more than I realized: performance reviews, where Marcus himself had praised my adaptability and innovation, emails thanking me for mentoring younger editors, statistics showing the success rates of books I had edited compared to company averages. We also documented the pattern of older employees being pushed out during restructuring, replaced with younger, less experienced staff, who were invariably described as bringing fresh energy and new perspectives to the company. Meanwhile, my document had evolved into something more structured, more intentional. What had begun as a private record of pain was becoming a chronicle of resistance. A detailed account not just of the discrimination I had faced, but of the steps I was taking to combat it. I continued to share portions of it on the Women's Forum, where each update was met with encouragement, advice, and more stories from women facing similar battles. Through that forum, I connected with Diana, the former HR executive who had first suggested I might have a legal case. She lived just outside the city and suggested we meet for coffee at a local diner. When I arrived at Joe's coffee shop on a Tuesday morning in early December, I spotted her immediately: a tall woman with short silver hair, wearing a red sweater and a statement necklace, exuding the kind of confidence I had once felt and was gradually reclaiming. "Catherine," she said warmly, standing to greet me with an outstretched hand. "It's good to meet you in person." Over the next 2 hours, Diana shared her own story of being pushed out of her executive role at age 58, of being told the company needed someone more in tune with millennial workers, of watching her replacement struggle with issues she could have solved easily, drawing on her decades of experience. She had fought back through legal channels, and had eventually settled with her former employer for an undisclosed but very satisfactory amount. But the money wasn't the most important part, she told me, stirring her second cup of coffee. What mattered was refusing to go quietly, refusing to accept that my value had somehow diminished just because I had the audacity to age. And what came after was even more important. What came after? I asked, intrigued by the spark in her eyes. I started consulting with companies on creating age-inclusive workplaces, she said. I turned what happened to me into a mission to change the culture that made it possible, and I connected with other women going through the same thing. We've built a network, a support system, a movement of sorts. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table to me. Age Equity Advocates, it read, with Diana's name and contact information. We meet twice a month, she continued. Professional women over 45 who are navigating ageism in their careers and personal lives. Some are fighting legal battles, some are reinventing themselves, some are just looking for community with people who understand. I think you'd be a valuable addition to our group. I turned the card over in my fingers, feeling a strange sense of destiny, as if the path that had seemed so dark and uncertain was beginning to reveal its purpose. I'd like that, I said. I think I'd like that very much. The first meeting I attended was held in the community room of a local library. 16 women ranging in age from mid-40s to early 70s gathered in a circle of chairs, each with a story similar to mine in its essence if not its details. There was Margaret, a former news anchor who had been moved to the early morning slot before being phased out entirely in favor of a 29-year-old former beauty queen. There was Judith, a real estate agent whose boss had suggested she might be more comfortable handling properties in retirement communities rather than the luxury downtown condos she had successfully sold for 15 years. There was Helen, whose husband of 26 years had left her for his 27-year-old administrative assistant, telling her he needed someone who could keep up with him. I listened to their stories, recognizing in each the same patterns of erasure and devaluation I had experienced, the same struggle to maintain dignity in a culture that equated female worth with youth and beauty. And when it was my turn to speak, I shared not only what had happened at Peyton Publishing but also the painful encounter with Emily, the realization that the ageism I faced wasn't confined to my professional life, but had infected my most intimate relationship as well. As I spoke, I saw nods of recognition, expressions of empathy, the unmistakable solidarity of women who knew exactly what I was describing because they had lived it themselves. For the first time since that night at the gala, I felt truly seen, not despite my age but because of it, because of the shared experiences that bound me to these women, the common struggle that united us. After the meeting, several women approached me, impressed by the detailed documentation I had been keeping. You should turn that into something, said Judith, the real estate agent, a blog, a book, something to get these stories out there. People need to understand. This isn't just about hurt feelings, it's about systematic discrimination, about the way society discards women once they're no longer young and compliant. I'm not a writer, I protested. I'm an editor. I help other people tell their stories. Maybe it's time to tell your own, Margaret, the former news anchor suggested. And not just yours, all of ours. This is happening to women everywhere, but so many suffer in silence, thinking they're alone, thinking it's their fault for not staying young enough, pretty enough, agreeable enough. The idea took root in my mind, growing stronger in the days and weeks that followed. I began to research, to read everything I could find on ageism and gender, on the economic impact of pushing experienced women out of the workforce, on the psychological effects of being made to feel invisible after decades of contribution. I discovered statistics that shocked me. Women over 50 were the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. The average woman could expect to live to 81, but would have difficulty finding employment after 50. The beauty industry made billions selling products promising to help women appear younger, while the median income for women decreased steadily after 45. As I gathered this information, my document evolved yet again. expanding beyond my personal experience to incorporate these broader patterns, these societal trends that explained why what had happened to me was not an isolated incident but part of a larger system that devalued women as they aged. I began to see my story as just one thread in a vast tapestry of female experience, one voice in a chorus that deserved it needed to be heard. The day after Christmas, Emily called. We hadn't spoken since our confrontation nearly 3 months earlier, though she had sent a text message on Thanksgiving with a generic "hope you're having a good day" that I had acknowledged but not expanded upon. Her voice sounded tentative when I answered, lacking the confident edge I had grown accustomed to. "Mom, I was wondering if we could get together to talk." She paused. "I've been doing some thinking." We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near my condo the next day. When Emily arrived, I was already seated at a corner table, watching through the window as she approached. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face drawn, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes darting to my face and then away. "You look good, Mom," she said, and there was a note of surprise in her voice that might have hurt me 3 months ago, but now just confirmed what I already knew, that she had expected age to wither me, to diminish me, in the time we had been apart. "Thank you," I replied simply. "How are you, Emily?" She twisted her engagement ring, a nervous habit she had developed since receiving the 3-carat diamond from Richard. I don't know. Things have been complicated. The wedding planning, work, everything." She took a deep breath. "Richard and I are postponing the wedding. Maybe indefinitely." I raised my eyebrows but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "His parents have been difficult," she said, her voice dropping, "especially his mother. She has opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, my dress, and Richard never disagrees with her. It's like he transforms into this completely different person around them." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Last week, she told me I needed to lose at least 15 pounds before the wedding if I wanted to look decent in the photos." And Richard just stood there, nodding along like she was being helpful. The familiar urge to protect her, to rush in with comfort and reassurance, rose within me. But something else rose alongside it: the recognition of a pattern I had seen in my own life, in the lives of the women in Diana's group. The casual cruelty masked as concern, the judgment disguised as helpfulness, the constant message that a woman's value lay in her appearance, her compliance, her willingness to shape herself to meet others' expectations. "That must have been hurtful," I said carefully, resisting the impulse to immediately vilify Richard and his mother. "How did that make you feel?" Emily looked surprised at the question, as if she had expected me to leap immediately to her defense or offer solutions. "I felt worthless," she admitted after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like nothing I do is ever going to be enough, like I'm constantly being measured against some impossible standard." She blinked rapidly. "And then I remembered what I said to you at the gala, and I realized I did the exact same thing. I made you feel like you weren't good enough, like you were an embarrassment, like you needed to be hidden away." I took a sip of my tea, giving myself a moment to absorb her words. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly how it felt." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I've been terrible to you. And I didn't even realize how terrible until I felt it myself." She reached across the table for my hand. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, seeing both the young woman she had become and the little girl she had been. The child who had once looked at me as if I hung the moon, before society taught her to see herself through a lens of perpetual inadequacy. "I forgive you," I said, squeezing her hand, "but I think we have a lot to talk about, a lot to understand about why you felt it was acceptable to treat me that way, about the messages you've internalized about women and aging and value." She nodded, wiping away tears. "I'd like that. I think I need that. Because I'm so tired of feeling like I'm never enough, and I'm starting to realize it's never going to end. If it's not my weight, it'll be my wrinkles. If it's not my wrinkles, it'll be my gray hair. There's always going to be something wrong with me, something to fix, something to hide." "That's exactly it," I said. feeling a surge of hope that perhaps my daughter might learn this lesson earlier than I had, might find her way to self-worth before spending decades trying to contort herself into shapes that pleased others. And we don't have to accept that. We can challenge it, reject it, create a different way of being in the world. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, peeling back layers of cultural conditioning, examining the ways in which we had both absorbed toxic messages about female value and worth, about the relationship between youth and relevance, beauty and deserving. Emily shared her growing disillusionment with Richard, her realization that he was more concerned with her role as an ornament in his life than as a partner, her fear that she had been seduced by the status and security he offered rather than genuine connection. I shared my experiences with Peyton Publishing, with the women's group, with the research I had been doing on ageism and gender discrimination. As we were preparing to leave, Emily asked, "What are you going to do now, Mom?" "About work, I mean. Are you looking for another editing job?" I smiled, feeling a sense of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm working on something new, actually. I'm writing a book about everything that's happened. About the experiences of women like me, about the economic and social impact of pushing women out of the workforce and out of visibility once they reach a certain age. It's still taking shape, but I think it could be important." Emily's eyes widened. "You're writing a book? That's amazing, Mom. You've always helped other people tell their stories. It's about time you told your own." Her words echoed Margaret's from the support group, and I felt a wave of gratitude for the strange, painful path that had led me to this moment, this new direction, this reclamation of my voice and worth. We hugged goodbye with a promise to meet again in the new year, to continue rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than the toxic dynamics we had both been caught in. As January dawned, my life had taken on a new rhythm. Each morning, I worked on my book, weaving together research, personal narrative, and the stories of women from Diana's group who had agreed to be interviewed. In the afternoons, I consulted with Rachel on my case against Peyton Publishing, which was progressing steadily through the EEOC process. Twice a month, I attended the Age Equity Advocates meetings, which had grown to include over 25 women, each bringing her own experience and expertise to our collective mission of challenging ageism in all its forms. It was at one of these meetings in late January that Diana approached me with an unexpected proposition. "We've been invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in March," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "A panel on age discrimination in the workplace. Margaret, Judith, and I are confirmed, and we'd like you to join us. Your perspective as someone going through an active EEOC claim, someone documenting the process so thoroughly it would be invaluable. Me, speak at a conference." I shook my head, momentarily overwhelmed by the suggestion. "I'm not a public speaker, Diana. I work behind the scenes, always have." Diana placed a hand on my arm. "That's exactly the point, Catherine. Too many of us have spent our lives working behind the scenes, making others look good, supporting from the shadows. It's time to step into the spotlight, to claim our expertise, our value, our right to be heard and seen." I thought about all the authors I had coached through interviews and public appearances, all the pep talks I had given, all the times I had assured them that their stories mattered, that audiences needed to hear what they had to say. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "Can I let you know?" "Next week." That night, as I updated my document with notes from the day's meeting, I found myself reflecting on Diana's invitation and my instinctive reluctance. Why was I so hesitant to speak publicly about an issue I had become passionate about, a cause I believed in deeply? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. I was afraid of being seen, of being judged, of being dismissed as just another bitter older woman complaining about her lot in life. I had internalized the very attitudes I was fighting against, the belief that women of a certain age should remain in the background, should not demand attention or assert their authority. The realization was both painful and liberating. If I truly believed in what I was writing, in the movement I had joined, then I needed to be willing to stand up and be counted. To use my voice not just on the page but in rooms full of people who might not want to hear what I had to say. I needed to be visible in precisely the ways society had tried to render me invisible. The next morning, I called Diana and accepted her invitation. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation, drafting talking points, participating in conference calls with the other panelists, even working with a speech coach that Margaret recommended to help me overcome my nervousness about public speaking. I found myself drawing on skills I hadn't used in years, discovering capabilities I had forgotten I possessed, feeling a growing sense of confidence that surprised and delighted me. February brought another unexpected development. Rachel called to inform me that Peyton Publishing had reached out to discuss a settlement. "They're nervous," she said, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "The EEOC investigator has been very thorough, and your documentation is impeccable. Plus, there's been some bad press about similar cases in the publishing industry. They want this to go away quietly." 2 days later, I sat across from Marcus and Peyton's legal team in Rachel's office, listening as they outlined their offer. 18 months salary, extended health benefits for 2 years, a letter of recommendation, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the case publicly. Rachel and I had anticipated this last condition and had already decided our response. "My client is prepared to accept the financial terms," Rachel said calmly, "but the NDA is a non-starter. We'll agree not to disclose the specific dollar amount of the settlement, but Catherine will retain the right to speak about her experiences at Peyton and the age discrimination she faced there." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not acceptable. The company has a reputation to protect. A reputation for discriminating against older employees," I asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Because that's the reputation you're currently building. I'm not the only one, Marcus. I've connected with 3 other former Peyton employees over 50 who were pushed out during restructuring in the past 5 years. If this goes to court, they'll all be called as witnesses." The company's lead attorney leaned forward. "Are you threatening us, Ms. Reynolds?" "Not at all," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm simply pointing out that if your concern is reputation, you might want to focus less on silencing the people you've wronged and more on changing the practices that wronged them in the first place." Rachel interjected before the attorney could respond. "My client is also asking for something beyond financial compensation. She wants Peyton Publishing to implement mandatory age bias training for all managers and executives, and to establish clear, objective criteria for promotions and layoff decisions to prevent further discrimination." Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "That's an unusual request." "It shouldn't be," I said. "It should be standard practice for any company that values the contributions of all its employees, regardless of age." The negotiation continued for another hour, with proposals and counterproposals flying back and forth across the conference table. In the end, we reached a compromise. I would accept slightly less money in exchange for both the freedom to speak about my experience and Peyton's commitment to implement the training and policy changes I had requested. Additionally, they agreed to create a mentorship program pairing experienced editors with newer employees, explicitly valuing the institutional knowledge that longtime staff members brought to the company. As we shook hands to conclude the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about how things ended. You were a valuable part of the team, and we didn't handle it well." "No, you didn't," I agreed, no longer interested in softening the truth to spare his feelings. "But what matters now is making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The Women in Leadership Conference was held at the downtown Marriott on the 3rd weekend in March. By then, my settlement with Peyton Publishing had been finalized. The first installment of the payment had arrived in my bank account, and my book manuscript was nearly halfway complete. I had also been asked to write an article on age discrimination for a major women's magazine, a direct result of Diana mentioning my work to a contact of hers in publishing. The conference room was larger than I had expected, with over 200 women in attendance, ranging from early career professionals to seasoned executives. As I took my place on the stage alongside Diana, Margaret, and Judith, I felt a momentary flutter of panic. What did I have to say that these accomplished women would want to hear? Who was I to claim expertise or authority on this or any subject? But then the moderator introduced us, describing each of our experiences with age discrimination and our efforts to combat it. When she came to me, she mentioned my ongoing book project, my successful EEOC claim, my work with age equity advocates. Hearing my accomplishments listed so matter-of-factly, I felt something shift within me, the realization that I did have something valuable to contribute, that my experience and insights were worth sharing, that my voice deserved to be heard. The panel discussion lasted 90 minutes, with each of us sharing our stories and responding to questions from the moderator and audience. I spoke about the subtle ways ageism had manifested at Peyton Publishing, about the double standard that demanded women remain youthful while valuing men for their experience and gravitas, about the economic impact of pushing experienced women out of the workforce, just as they reached the peak of their expertise and capability. We're not asking for special treatment, I said in response to one question. We're asking for equal treatment, for the recognition that our value doesn't diminish with age. In fact, it often increases as we accumulate knowledge, perspective, and wisdom. We're asking to be evaluated on our actual abilities and contributions, not on cultural stereotypes about women of a certain age. The applause that followed was like nothing I had experienced before. Hundreds of women standing, clapping, some wiping away tears, all recognizing in my words some truth of their own lives, their own fears, their own determination to be seen and valued. In that moment, I felt more visible, more powerful, more authentically myself than I had in decades. After the panel concluded, a line of women formed to speak with us, to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to express gratitude for our willingness to address a topic so many had experienced but few had named. Among them was a young woman, perhaps 30, who approached me with a thoughtful expression. "I'm an editor at Harper & Row," she said, extending her hand. "Melissa Chen, I was really moved by your story and your perspective. Have you considered turning your book into something more formal? With your background in publishing, your personal experience, and the research you've been doing, it sounds like something that could make an important contribution to the conversation about gender and ageism." I blinked in surprise. I've been working on it more as a personal project, a way to process everything that's happened. I hadn't really thought beyond that. Melissa smiled. "Well, think about it. If you're interested, I'd love to see a proposal or some sample chapters. Here's my card." She handed me a business card with the Harper & Row logo, her contact information printed beneath it. "No pressure, but I think you might have an important book on your hands." I slipped the card into my pocket, trying to contain the surge of excitement that coursed through me. An editor from a major publishing house was interested in my book, not as the anonymous person behind the scenes, making other people's words shine, but as an author, in my own right, with a story that mattered, a perspective that added value to the cultural conversation. That evening, the 4 panelists celebrated over dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. We toasted our successful presentation, the connections we had made, the momentum we felt building around our mission to challenge ageism and create more equitable workplaces and communities. As we shared a dessert sampler, Diana proposed a toast. "To Catherine," she said, raising her glass, "who took one of the most painful experiences of her life and transformed it into a catalyst for change, not just for herself, but for all of us. Your courage in standing up to Peyton, in rebuilding your relationship with your daughter, in finding your voice and sharing your story, it's inspired all of us." I felt my cheeks flush with emotion as Margaret and Judith raised their glasses as well, echoing Diana's words with their own expressions of support and admiration. "I couldn't have done any of it without all of you," I said, my voice thick with feeling. "You helped me see that what happened wasn't my fault, that I wasn't alone, that there was a path forward that didn't involve simply accepting erasure and invisibility, and now you're helping others see that too," Margaret said. That's how change happens, one story, one conversation, one person at a time. As we left the restaurant, bundling into our coats, against the early spring chill, I checked my phone and found a text message from Emily. Just saw a video clip of your panel on Instagram. You were amazing. So proud of you, Mom. Can't wait to hear all about it. Lunch tomorrow, I smiled, typing back a quick response. Thanks, honey. Lunch sounds perfect. So much to tell you. Walking to my car, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey of the past 6 months, for the painful awakenings and unexpected gifts, for the community I had found and the purpose that had emerged from what had initially seemed like nothing but loss. At 57, I was more visible, more engaged, more authentic than I had been in years, perhaps than I had ever been. I was no longer trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less demanding of space and attention. I was claiming my right to be seen, to be heard, to contribute meaningfully to the world around me. The following week, I sat at my kitchen table with Melissa's business card propped against my laptop, staring at the email I had drafted, a brief introduction, a description of my book project, and an attached outline and sample chapter. My finger hovered over the send button. A lifetime of conditioning, making me hesitate, making me question whether my voice deserved this platform, whether my story was important enough to publish, whether I was overstepping by aspiring to authorship after decades of enabling others to claim that role. And then I thought of the women at the conference, of the messages I had received since, from attendees who had been moved by our panel, of Diana and Margaret and Judith, and all the members of age equity advocates who were refusing to accept invisibility, of Emily and her growing awareness of the cultural forces that shaped her perceptions of herself and others. I thought of the hundreds, thousands, millions of women who had been told in countless ways that their value diminished with each passing year, each line that appeared, each gray hair that emerged. I clicked send. 6 months later, I stood in the community room of the local library where I had first attended the Age Equity Advocates meeting, now packed with people gathered for the launch of my book, Invisible No More, Women, Age, and the Fight for Relevance. Harper and Row had moved quickly once they acquired the manuscript, recognizing its timeliness and potential impact in a cultural moment where conversations about gender equity were expanding to include issues of age discrimination. The crowd included women from the support group, former colleagues from Peyton Publishing, including Jessica, the young editor who had replaced me and had since become an unexpected ally in changing the company culture, friends I had reconnected with after years of allowing work to consume my life, and Emily, who had finally broken off her engagement to Richard and was exploring a new career path that aligned more authentically with her values. As I prepared to read from the opening chapter, I caught Diana's eye in the front row. She gave me a subtle nod of encouragement, a gesture that acknowledged how far I had come from that devastating night at the gala, when my daughter had told me I was too old to be seen. Now, I was deliberately making myself seen, claiming space not just for myself but for all the women who had been told in various ways that they should disappear, should apologize for aging, should accept marginalization as the natural consequence of no longer being young. When I arrived at my daughter's charity gala, I read from the opening page. She grabbed my wrist and hissed in my ear, "Mom, you're too old to be seen here." The words hit me like shards of glass slicing through my chest. Too old to be seen here. I paused, looking up at the attentive faces before me. That moment changed everything for me, though I didn't realize it at the time. It was the beginning of a journey that would lead me to confront not just my daughter's attitudes but an entire culture that renders women invisible once they no longer meet certain standards of youth and beauty, that discards their talents and contributions, that tells them their stories no longer matter. I turned the page, continuing to read the account of that painful night, now transformed through perspective and purpose into something powerful, rather than merely wounding. As I read, I saw nods of recognition throughout the audience, saw women of all ages leaning forward to catch every word, saw the unmistakable look of people finding language for experiences they had previously struggled to articulate. When I finished the reading, the applause was immediate and sustained. During the Q&A session that followed, women shared their own stories of invisibility and erasure, of professional setbacks and personal rejections, of the struggle to maintain a sense of self-worth in a culture that measured female value in such limited terms. But they also shared stories of resistance and reinvention, of communities formed and battles won, of discovering new purpose and passion in the very years they had been told would bring nothing but decline. As the event wound down and I signed copies of my book, a young woman approached the table, perhaps 25, with bright eyes and an earnest expression. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said as I signed her copy. "I've been dreading getting older, seeing it as this terrible thing that would take away everything I value about myself. Your book, your story, it gives me hope that there's another way to look at it, that growing older can be about becoming more myself, not less." I smiled, deeply moved by her words. "That's exactly right," I said, handing her the signed book. "It's not about fighting against time, it's about claiming every year as valuable, as meaningful, as part of what makes you uniquely yourself." Later that evening, as Emily and I shared a quiet dinner at my condo, she raised her glass in a toast. "To my mom, the published author, the age equity advocate, the woman who taught me that true value doesn't diminish with time." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a profound sense of peace and purpose. "And to new beginnings," I added. At any age. 6 weeks after the book launch, I received an email from Rachel, my attorney. Peyton Publishing had fully implemented the age bias training we had negotiated as part of my settlement, and early feedback suggested it was having a meaningful impact on company culture and hiring practices. The mentorship program pairing experienced editors with newer employees was thriving, with several younger staff members reporting that they had gained invaluable insights from working closely with senior colleagues. And most surprisingly, they were interested in having me return as a consultant to help develop more inclusive policies and practices. I smiled as I read the email, appreciating the irony. The company that had once pushed me out for being too old, to set in my ways, not vibrant enough, was now seeking my expertise precisely because of the perspective my age and experience provided. It was a small victory but a significant one, a tangible sign that change was possible, that the work I and women like me were doing was shifting attitudes and behaviors in measurable ways. That same week, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on women in the workplace, alongside other authors and activists who were challenging various forms of discrimination and inequity. My book had struck a chord, tapping into experiences that many women had felt, but few had named so explicitly. I was receiving messages daily from readers who found validation and inspiration in my story, who were using the book to start conversations in their own workplaces and communities, who were refusing to accept invisibility and demanding to be valued for their full humanity, rather than just their youth or appearance. As I marked my 58th birthday that October, exactly 1 year after the night at the gala that had set this journey in motion, I reflected on the profound transformation of the previous 12 months. I had lost things I had once thought essential: a career I had built over 19 years, a certain kind of relationship with my daughter, the illusion that hard work and loyalty would protect me from the biases that affected other women. But I had gained so much more: a new purpose, a community of like-minded women, a platform to advocate for change, a more authentic relationship with Emily, based on mutual respect rather than her approval or my accommodation. And most importantly, a deep and abiding sense of my own worth that was no longer dependent on external validation or conformity to limiting standards of female value. I was not the same woman who had stood frozen in humiliation at the entrance to the Westlake Country Club ballroom, feeling erased by her own daughter's shame. I was stronger, more vocal, more comfortable in my own skin. I had reclaimed the right to be seen, to take up space, to speak with authority. I had transformed from a woman who apologized for aging into one who celebrated the wisdom, perspective, and liberation that came with years lived fully and authentically. As I prepared for a book tour that would take me to 15 cities over the next 2 months, I felt a sense of anticipation rather than anxiety, of purpose rather than uncertainty. I was no longer just living my life, I was using it. Leveraging my experience and voice to create change, to challenge harmful norms, to build solidarity with other women fighting the same battles. At 58, I wasn't fading into invisibility or irrelevance, I was just getting started. The journey had not been easy or straightforward. There had been moments of doubt and despair, days when the weight of confronting such deeply entrenched biases seemed overwhelming. But with each step forward, each meeting with the support group, each page written, each speech given, each small victory when I had grown more certain that this was work worth doing, not just for myself but for all the women who had been told in countless ways that their time had passed, that they should step aside, that they were too old to be seen. We deserved to be seen. We deserved to be heard. We deserved to bring our full selves, including our age, our experience, our hard-won wisdom to every table, every conversation, every aspect of society, and I would spend however many years I had left making sure that message was heard, challenging the culture that had once nearly convinced me to disappear, creating spaces where women of all ages could be valued for exactly who they were. Too old to be seen here. No, I was exactly old enough to see clearly, to speak truthfully, to stand firmly in my power and purpose. And that clarity, that truth, that power would only grow stronger with each passing year.